Com. I'm Peter Castano, and today I will be talking with Robin Schmid, a former Princeton in Latin America fellow from Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and the Development and Communications Coordinator with the Women's Justice Initiative, a Guatemala-based NGO. Thanks so much for talking with me today, Robin.
I'm happy to. Thanks for having me.
So, can you talk a bit about your background and how you got involved with women's rights in Guatemala, and what your specific role with the NGO you work with consists of?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I went to Georgetown University, their School of Foreign Service, and I focused my studies there on Latin American community development, and I spent a lot of time working, volunteering in summers, and taking a semester off in various communities, countries across Latin America. So I really got into the grassroots nonprofit world about 6 or 7 years ago. When I graduated, I got a Princeton in Latin America fellowship, and I began working with a nonprofit, a grassroots nonprofit in a large indigenous community in Santiago Atitlan called Pueblo a Pueblo. And there I was involved in various aspects of fundraising, monitoring and evaluation, external relations. And it was through my time there in that community where I started really building relationships both within the organization and in the community, that I saw how important the need is here to focus on women and empowering women and their voices, because here in Guatemala it's a very machista society, so it's very male dominated. There's a lot of kind of these traditional gender norms, stereotypes at play, and oftentimes, women are seen as like their primary function is to be a mother and to work in the home, and that's it. And because of that, really, women aren't given the opportunity to participate in public spaces, to be part of, to be community leaders, to continue with their education beyond primary school, and if we're talking about rural indigenous communities. So the more time that I spent in that community, and just found out more kind of about what my passions are, I wanted to continue professionally, and so I got a job with the Women's Justice Initiative. So we are a nonprofit organization that improves the lives of Indigenous Guatemalan women and girls through education, access to legal services, and gender-based violence prevention. I am the Development and Communications Coordinator, so I'm working primarily in fundraising, grant writing, the administrative pieces, to ensuring that our programs can function and that we have enough funding to be able to support our various programs. And WJI, or Women's Justice Initiative, has a multi-tier aspect to how we provide access to justice and work on breaking these cycles of gender inequality and violence. And so that's done both through education of women and girls, and workshops that are centered around women's rights and leadership development. We build local female leaders who act as activists and women's rights defenders and mentors to other local women in their communities. And then we also provide direct services so that women can exercise their right to live free from violence and exercise their economic rights. It's important that we're not just empowering women and girls with knowledge and skills, but then we are providing, an outlet, a way that they can then exercise their rights and use their voice. So I love the work that I do. I think this organization is incredible and is really changing lives for the better. And I'm inspired daily by the women who are leading this movement for gender equality. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and the work that I do.
Really cool, definitely. Something that really highlights the gravity of the situation in Guatemala, specifically in regards to what you're talking about, was the burning of a children's shelter in the Virgin de la Asunción home, resulting in the deaths of 35 girls. The door to the girls' room was likely locked, possibly intentionally or due to extreme negligence, and authorities have failed to thoroughly investigate the situation. What would you say this tragedy reveals about the culture and legal system in Guatemala?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That tragedy last year that happened in March of 2017, and it really mobilized this nation. I mean, even though there are atrocious human rights human rights violations taking place on a daily basis, the fact that it was actually 41 girls now were killed because of that fire, and it's really sparked outrage in the nation, but also reflects just a complete lack of basically safe spaces and adequate facilities for vulnerable youth, for any vulnerable population. Because let's keep in mind that this shelter, this was basically an orphanage. So these weren't these were not girls that were accused of any type of crime. A lot of them were sent to this shelter because their parents did not have the resources to support them in the home, because parents thought that they would be safer in the shelter than on the streets, where the Mara or local gangs were threatening them, or worse. And so, and what transpired these events is that earlier that morning, the morning of the 8th of March, both a large group of girls and boys staged a mass protest. So they were rioting and attempted to escape, and then after they were hunted down and brought back and then locked in this room and not given anything but a couple of old mattresses. So now, had they tried to escape? Why were they protesting? So it's come out in the aftermath that shelter had a long history of abuse allegations. So over 40 reports of abuse were filed between 2012 and 2016. However, there was no action taken. And even in 2014, there was a contractor that was hired by the home was convicted of raping a mentally disabled 17-year-old girl there. And many of the girls that had been living at the shelter said that they'd rather die than go back because they were being mistreated and were not being fed. There are many reports that these girls were being pimped out, that the staff, the guards would be prostituting out these girls. So then what transpired was that they were locked in this room, and to protest, to say, let us out, because they were in there for hours. Witnesses say that one of the girls set fire to a mattress, thinking that they would be let out, but that was not the case. They were in that room for over 7 minutes, and so 41 girls have died. So this incident is not, it's horrendous. This is tragic. But this incident is not isolated. So, the fact that this ended in this tragic fire is atrocious, but it really shows this lack of safe spaces for girls, and also a lack of safe spaces, any state-run kind of institution for any survivors of violence, survivors of sexual assault. I can speak from experience for our in our organization. Many times, families, girls, women are afraid to come forward and speak about, talk about what has happened to them if they were raped, if they are a survivor of sexual assault, because, for example, with girls, parents don't want girls to be sent to one of these state-run institutions because the horrors that happen there. So in many ways, they feel that it would be safer for the girl to stay with them, even if, for example, the neighbor was the perpetrator. That still that girl would be safer in her own home with her assailant nearby than in one of these state-run institutions. So it's just, I mean, this horrible event has shown more and more that really the state is not appropriately protecting its citizens, and that there's so much levels of impunity in Guatemala are extremely high. So even though the Guatemala Secretary of Social Welfare has been arrested and charged with crimes like such as wrongful death and negligence in this specific case, in this fire, but most of the time even if there are charges, there is no sentence. Yeah, and just to give you a better idea too of how bad things are in Guatemala, especially when it comes to gender violence. Guatemala has the third highest rate of femicide in the world, and Guatemala has the third lowest rate of gender equality in Latin America. So combine this with just widespread impunity, this machista, machista society. It's a really, really difficult place to be a woman, especially a girl. So
Yeah, absolutely. I know Honduras and El Salvador are very high up in those statistics as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that really helps lead into my last question here, regarding the caravan that is currently a major headline in the news. So a caravan of Central American migrants fighting to get past the Guatemalan border into Mexico to seek refuge. Can you talk a bit about the situation and how your background gives you insight into the extreme circumstances that these people are fleeing from?
Yeah. Excuse me. So this caravan that originated in Honduras. So most of the people, I think it's over 3,000 people now, are Honduran, although I think some Guatemalans have joined along the way, and maybe some Mexicans will as well. It has now moved into Mexico, despite Guatemala had tried to prevent the caravan from crossing into Mexico, but ultimately they stood down when it was clear that that these people were going to continue moving forward. And I just, in relation to the caravan, I just want to make it clear that these are not bad people. These are not criminals, as it has been said by the President of the United States. I do not know individually every single person, but these are people who are fighting to survive. They are fighting for a better life for themselves and their children. So these are people who are fleeing from communities, from cities where violence is rampant, where every day their life may be threatened by gangs, where they in rural areas too many families can't afford to put food on the table for their kids, or kids would have to be sent to work already kids are being sent to work in fields at age 5 and age 6, not because parents want that for their children. I think it is universal that parents want the best for their children, but because there is no other option. So it's a lack of opportunity and just this ongoing uh, horrendous violence that are pushing these people to leave their countries and look for a better life and for safety and survival in the United States. And I, I think speaking to Guatemala's predicament, a threat from the U.S. administration, for example, has been, and I think that President Trump said that it's going to be realized that foreign aid will be cut to Guatemala, to Honduras, to Mexico, um, and because they have allowed these people to travel through their countries, and I that's a really um, I think that's a really terrible position to put Guatemala in because yes, the foreign aid is important to this economy, but I also think that we need to remember, and especially U.S. citizens need to remember, that U.S. involvement in Central American government
Absolutely.
in the 20th century, in the mid 20th century, was largely responsible for the instability that we see today, and then for military dictatorships and civil wars that then happened. For example, in Guatemala, there was a 36-year civil war where there was a genocide against the indigenous peoples here. And peace accords were only signed in 1996. So this is a country, a post-conflict country that is still trying to get on its feet and still trying to recover from some, horrendous events and really violent governments. And who put those governments in place? That was, that was in large part due to the United States, to the United States foreign policy, the United States policy in Central America. So it's important that we don't, that when we talk about immigrants, we remember that they are people and that they are just trying, they're trying to do what is best for them and what is best for their families. And we, we also can't now the United States, we have power, we have money, but we also should be accountable for our actions in the past. And so if we had played a hand in like these difficult outcomes right now in Central America, like these violent just the violent reality of daily life, then I think we should be accountable to that, and then not villainize people who are trying to escape those violent realities. So, and then just to add one more point, people are shocked by this idea of over 3,000 people moving together in this big caravan, but why people have joined up and why more and more people are immigrating together is because it is safer, because the journey for a migrant from their country to the United States is one of the most, difficult, dangerous journeys that they will take. And so if they are willing to take that journey, then, that could end their life, that where, 1 in 3, although with such underreporting, so it's probably much higher, like women and girls are getting raped, are getting sexual assaulted, are being trafficked. I mean, it's a terrifying and a dangerous journey. So there's safety in numbers, and so that's why these individuals and these families are joining together to move towards the United States. It's not, it does. It looks like it's making a big political statement, but if you were to, if you listen to interviews with members of this caravan, they're not doing this for the politics. They don't even know the extent, of this crisis in U.S. politics and our division, because divisions based on immigration policy. They don't care. What they care about is surviving and getting themselves and their families safely to the United States. So again, it's not these are not bad people. Generally, these are just people looking for a better future.
Yeah, yeah, and like you highlighted, the U.S. needs to recognize how its role, its foreign policy, has destabilized a lot of these governments. For example, in Honduras, the U.S. tacitly approved of the 2009 coup, in which they pushed the OAS, the Organization of American States, to support new elections and sideline the ousted president, even though the actions were condemned as a coup by the UN, the EU, and the OAS. And since then, a lot of that aid goes directly to a militarized police that is widely condemned for oppressing dissidents and brutally suppressing protests. But they're directly funded by the U.S.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and I think, you know, we need to remember that. So that's something that is completely overlooked in why there's a so-called immigration crisis nowadays. I think if we also look to supporting these Central American governments and not supporting Central American governments, supporting Central American civil society,
Yeah.
and you know, then that will help so much with this idea of, oh, no more immigrants. It's like, well, it's not that people just want to go to the U.S. to go to the U.S. They would like to stay in their community if their community was safe. And the U.S. played a large hand in making their community unsafe decades ago. And so let's take next time, be responsible in how we act and how we welcome or villainize people who are fleeing and the effects of this instability. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your experiences and your insight about this crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.